Past Lives by Celine Song. It shouldn't overshadow our review too much to say that this is an A24, I think, production and distribution. Because it's not the typical A24 release, but it does have some of the kind of sensibilities, politically perhaps, of that house, of that production house, distribution house.
Yeah.
The plot summary, I'll just quickly run through it. Past Lives. It's called Past Lives because it refers to this Korean idea that people have met in past lives. People who don't know each other in this life have met in past lives, or have a person, are in yun, this phrase, are in some kind of association. It seems quite vague, or maybe I just didn't listen very well, but it's always possible. But the protagonist is this woman who, as a young girl, was taken by her parents, ambitious parents who emigrated from Korea to Canada, to Toronto, and she seems at the time quite keen on the idea. She's doing very well in a literature class, and she wants to be a writer. And she justifies the departure by saying that Koreans don't win the Nobel Prize for Literature, so she wants to go to the West and be a great writer. And the only real hitch to this great story is that she's leaving behind her close friend and confidant. I mean, they are both very young at this point, maybe 7 or 8. I don't know.
I think so.
This young boy. I'm not going to remember anyone's name, but yeah. This young boy from Korea, and 12 years later, she's now she's given herself an English name. She lives in New York. She's moved to New York. She's become a kind of quite an established-ish young writer.
She's on the up.
She's on the up.
She's a favourite new poet.
And then at a residency that she's on, a writing residency, she meets a kind of a modest and affable Jewish. He's fond of referring to his Jewishness frequently. Jewish man. I can't remember his name either.
I can't remember.
It's a totally race blind forgetting of names on this
Ralph
podcast.
Doesn't see names or proper nouns
or anything. I just see cinema.
Yeah.
But yes, and then so they get together, she gets into communication with.
You've misaligned.
So before she meets the guy, she's curious about this boy that she was friends with, and she goes on Facebook and asks one of the older people in the community, or the father or something. She realizes that he's been trying to get into contact with her, and then they have a sort of month or so of kind of incessant Zoom calls, or they would Skype in those days. All done very accurately and sort of painfully, sort of evocative of that particular technological era. But they eventually decide that this is stupid. They can't.
Well, she kind of calls it. She puts them's the brakes. You know, she says, I want to focus on my life in America, exactly. Not. So really, what the film sets up is the final act where this guy, 12 years later, 12
more years later,
12 years of simp, comes to, basically has been burning this candle for this whole time. He finally comes to America, and he claims he's there to
girlfriends have come and gone, but there's one person who's dominated his heart.
He can't shake this woman. So he goes to America, and ostensibly he says to her, and I'm going on holiday, so we may as well hang out with her. It turns out he's actually there purely just to hang out with her. And there's a sort of love triangle in a way where these three people have a kind of tense dinner, and they have this kind of rapprochement, and they do a bit of sightseeing, the girl and the boy.
One thing I quite liked about the film is that it opened with a sort of silent shot of or like a dialogue-free shot of these people with a voiceover from someone else in the bar, kind of saying, "Wonder what these people's relationship."
I actually loved that.
That was really sweet, and that made me think
a really interesting.
That made me think it would be a better film than it was.
Because, ladies and gentlemen, so I think because it's an A24 production, it does kind of have the worst kind of. Again, I think I would describe it as the kind of Ottolenghi, ficus fiddly fig tree, Matisse print of a film. You know, it's very lovely to look at. and it's very nicely composed. Probably it's just very elegant, and it's so very nice and so very just. And I think so. It has this desiring ambience around it, but not a kind of frothy languor that you'd expect from a kind of film that's really emotionally charged. Because doesn't really feel like there's any chemistry between these two people actually. Maybe that's the point, because she doesn't really. But it implies there is something really, really profoundly strong there, but inexplicable, which is this Inyun thing, I suppose. But yeah, it's just very by the numbers, really. I think the emotional heft that it was trying to convey through, again, instrument like programmatic bits of music and so on, were I found very they fell flat for me. And I think there was this sense that one thing that did annoy me, obviously, their kind of sightseeing and their life is in New York, and obviously New York is a place that's so overdetermined by filmic representations and romances. You could think, say, Woody Allen, Manhattan, or whatever. So many many such cases. So it's somewhere really oversaturated. So it's like, okay, so why New York? I think it's purely because of that. It's just like, okay, this is the romance place, and it's good to shoot, and we associate romance with New York and film.
Yeah.
But I think
and writers,
and I think there's just, but again, it's a very bloodless New York. All the Woody Allen film, the desperate love of New York, the use of like Chet Baker maybe and things like that is so powerful, because it's such a love affair with the city. Whereas here, it's just like New York has a kind of poster in an Airbnb on an Airbnb wall or something. It's this kind of postcard New York that has no real presence, or it could be Detroit or LA. It could be anywhere in America. But it seemed to be like it's saying something through New York, and yet New York wasn't saying anything. It was just, it looked nice. And
there's a kind
the target market probably lives in New York or something. I don't know.
Definitely, there's a cringe bit where they go. Her and the Korean lad go. They go on the Staten Island ferry to see the what's it called? Statue of Liberty.
Yeah.
And what's his chops? Jewish guy, boyfriend, husband. When he hears about this, he's like, "Oh, I've never been there." In the same way that I've never done the London Eye. And she says, "Oh, I'm sure we've gone there together, haven't we?" And it's sort of like, like really obviously like not really, like sort of trying to cover over the fact that there's this secret bond that her and this guy from back home share, and also the political significance of the Statue of Liberty, that it's like
the first thing immigrants see.
Obviously, when the area of the plane, it isn't, but it's this symbolic of American freedom and of her, and in a sense, maybe she's shown him the Statue of Liberty to kind of try and give her some insight into like
it's a very generous reading of
the
that.
idea. It's not generous. It's I think it's
heavy-handed.
I think it's fucking heavy-handed.
Yeah.
I think it's exactly why this film will be on Obama's end of year list, because it is a film that tries to it's a sort of espouse this idea that's under threat from the right, obviously, of a kind of liberal American dream.
Yeah, you're right.
Liberal,
it really is.
A liberal, I won't say globalist, because that's become very reactionary, but an open to the world American dream, that highlights the simple fact that America is constructed, almost entirely of
it's so
immigrants.
telling that as well. You're so right about that. This kind of this particular glossy image of celebrating liberal America and its institutions, and I think it's very, very telling that all of these characters come from the kind of professional and creative classes. Her parents, an artist and a filmmaker. She's a writer, and the man she was dating when she was younger in Korea is an engineer, successful, wealthy engineer. So there's this kind of invocation that it's not the sly people slipping over the border in the South. These are the grand tradition of America. Sort of people coming with their professional degrees and their creativity to America,
which is fine. I think people.
I'm not denying that happening, but it's very
people
much
should migrate if they want to. But
100%. I'm not unveiling against immigration, but I am saying it's as you said, it does celebrate this particular kind of liberal, laudatory liberal,
the good migrants,
story about migration to America, and how it's I suppose in rejecting him, she's rejecting Korea.
But it all, yeah,
and kind of what it's saying.
But she doesn't. She sort of holds a candle for him in a way that sort of satisfies no one, and that's fine. Like life is like that, and people feel ambivalent about. There's always a one that got away. In romance, quite often that's totally. I get that, but the fact that it's overcoded with this particular idea about her, there are obviously lots of bits where she speaks in Korean to him, and then the boyfriend he's trying to learn Korean to understand what she says in her sleep, because apparently she talks in her sleep in Korean, and he tries to speak to this guy in Korean, but obviously his Korean is not that good, because it's a very hard language to learn as an Anglophone, I assume. And also it's a puff piece for two things. It's a puff piece for the idea that jealousy is immature, and that we should all handle things like adults. I heard in the press conference, the guy that plays the kind of cuck, essentially, he's saying, I was really proud of the fact that we showed these men, speaking with admiration of each other in a situation that's usually, can often be shown with resentment. I mean, I thought this was insane. I was hoping this performance would highlight the suppressed rage that he would obviously be feeling at her wife not loving him.
The tensions between these people, he can't compete. It's a great Romeric setup. These kind of different longings and desires, and people trying to impose their will on each other.
It's a complete denial of the emotional truth of that situation. Yeah. I'm sorry, it just is like that's like
because he's so understanding. This boyfriend. This film is actually it's basically this is what you show your girlfriend before suggesting having an open relationship. This is what
but it's also a puff. It's a puff piece for this I find very irritating sort of liberal identity notion around that everyone should everyone who has a sort of identity that they can a past identity they can fall back on should seek to sort of invoke it humorously as often as possible. Even the Jewish
he's like Korean.
Yeah, he's Korean, and then this woman is like and this woman is like feeling like needing to constantly convey her melancholy at being from a different place, which is just in my mind really tedious, because she is obviously
longing for home is a real emotional feeling.
It's a real feeling that experience, but it didn't convey it in a way that made me feel anything to do with, I mean, obviously I've lived in London all my life, but I should be able to. It shouldn't be limited. The feeling that's being conveyed shouldn't be limited only to people who have a comparable experience. It should convey the melancholy of this situation in a way that transcends personal experience.
I also feel like I don't want to kind of like speak on matters I don't really know about, but it feels as well like she's from a successful, wealthy family. It's not like the homeland is shut off for her forever. There's also a very established Korean immigrant community in America, very established.
We don't meet any of her friends.
We don't meet any of her friends. She seems not to really keep the company of really anyone apart from her husband. And it's not like South Korea is closed off for her in any way. That feels like a self-imposed thing that I want to embrace America. And she can surely afford to travel back. She mentions that she's traveled back there at some point. So I think there's a certain kind of, it implies this like great, this huge fundament of finality in this film, and I don't think it seems to be overplaying. It's exaggerating for effect.
Yeah, and it doesn't. Yeah, and it doesn't have any of the nuance or restraint it clearly thinks it's having, and also it's just cast badly. I mean, and the acting, the guys just don't convey any of the last. I mean, you don't get a sense that you don't get any sense other than this guy being Korean. You don't get any, and this like thing that happened. I mean, what are they supposed to? Are they thinking about? Are they like jacking off to the memory of like when they were walking down the road as 7-year-olds? I mean, what is this romantic attachment that's emerged?
Yeah, there's no chemistry there.
The audience is not brought. It's not given any real reason to believe that relationship. No doubt this film will be released and will be lauded because it tells a certain story and represents certain things and has nice blinky blonky piano music that makes you
and looks very nice.
Have a sad face. Briefly.
This is a film that puts its coasters out. For guests. I think this is there is a sense where there was no frisson of erotically charged encounters between them, and there's a moment where at the end of the film he's waiting for his taxi, and it might be the last time they see each other in a way, and they kind of stare at each other silently, and there's nothing between them there. For me, it felt like a complete blankness between them, whereas that scene should have felt so tense with sublimated, erotic or desiring energy, but it just wasn't there. I didn't feel that this was really a film of desire. It was superficially desirable. It's a desirable film, not a desiring film, I think. That would be the distinction I'd make. But yeah, so...
and everyone in the audience seemed to fucking love that shit, man. It was so
They
alienating.
loved it when she talked about...
It was probably that and Ingeborg Bachmann was like a real low point for me in Berlinale.